Hello, I'm Eric Holdeman, and welcome to Disaster Zone, a show about emergencies and disasters that can happen anywhere and at any time. As more people move to the city of Bellevue, what are emergency managers doing to ensure businesses and residents are resilient? Today we're talking with Curry Mayer, the director of Bellevue's Office of Emergency Management. And welcome, Curry, to being on the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Okay.
So, starting right out, do you think there's any place, state, county, or city that is really ready for a catastrophe?
So the short answer is no,
Yeah.
but it's really very complicated. And the reason I say that is we are constantly planning for the last disaster. We only know the most recent disaster, which usually brings up some gaps in our planning and preparedness, and so we tend to focus on that. Real catastrophes, of course, will not look like anything we've planned for. And then two other key areas are one, that no place has enough people, equipment, and stuff or resources to respond to a truly catastrophic event.
Yeah.
So we're constantly looking for partnerships, ways to do that. Government doesn't have a lot of funding, and government can't do everything by itself. So the other piece of that adds to not being ready for a catastrophe is that the public is not really ready. We've put out lots of messages. Often those who are in the most vulnerable positions are not prepared at all.
You're talking about average citizens.
Average citizens, that's correct.
And I always tell people when I do presentations for a big disaster, no one is coming to help. I mean,
Yes.
as you said, fire and police aren't big enough. They're scaled for the heart attack, the sprained ankle, that not for a disaster. So tell us a little bit about your background in emergency management prior to coming to Washington State, and then what you're doing today in Bellevue.
Okay. So when I was in school, there was no such thing as a degree in emergency management and Homeland Security. So I was a communications major, which actually has served me really well. I also have a master's in education, and I've done a lot of teaching in my career of non-traditional public safety professionals. But I started in the private sector. I worked for a consulting firm in DC and worked on a number of emergency management projects, most notably the White House Military Office. That was a protection of the principal, meaning the president. Also, how do we reconstitute the government should there be a nuclear explosion?
Yeah.
We were still focused on that.
Actually, I worked on that in the Army when I was active duty.
Yes,
Yeah.
so you're very familiar. A lot of exercises. Department of the Army did a lot of exercises and training. I did some work for the UN, and then moved to California, where I was raised, and spent a good deal of time in emergency management at California at all levels of government, but for the longest time for the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, focusing on training and exercises, really preparing public safety folks as much as possible, and then some other groups that would play in the emergency management, so schools, community groups, nonprofits, that kind of thing. And also some departments in state government. So Department of Agriculture, I spent a good amount of time there, and also with the Department of Water Resources.
Okay.
Then most recently moved here to the state of Washington.
And you started on November 1st.
I did.
I don't know why I can remember that, but I remember November 1st. It's 2.5 years ago. So what do you do there now?
So I am in charge of the emergency management program for the city of Bellevue. I also have some regional roles, emergency management.
And we're going to talk about some of those coming up.
Okay.
Yep.
We focus a lot on working with our neighbors and regional partners, which is really key to being successful in emergency management.
And when you say neighbors, what do you mean by neighbors?
So neighboring jurisdictions, so the cities on the east side primarily. We also, of course, work with Seattle. And then, as far south, we also have a tri-county partnership. So we work with Pierce and Snohomish.
Okay.
A little bit with Kitsap as well.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about California. I was up here in Washington State. I worked at Washington State Emergency Management. I thought, if we could only be like California. They have it so wired. They got it so together. They have this standardized emergency management system. that ended up after 9/11 kind of being adopted, translated into the National Incident Management System. And then I actually did some consulting down there. I said, ooh, you know, I didn't find that to be them to be as good and ready as that. So, you know, they often held up as the best of best. But how do you think they really measure up? I was surprised types of things I ran into.
So I think a couple of things that are key to their success and also where there may be gaps.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, the standardized emergency management system that uses ICS or Incident Command System was then used as the model for the national system. And it is used throughout California, mostly in cities and counties. And it has a very organized way of moving resources. The problem is, like most places in emergency management, there's a pretty high turnover. So as you see big changes in city governments, both for the city or county organization itself, in addition to emergency management, then you have new people that come in that may not be as experienced either using the system or may not have a lot of response experience. So I think it's one thing to have a good organizational structure, but the key is really being able to use it. So as people retire and you have new folks in, then they don't have as much real response experience, and I think that makes a big difference.
And there's been, here in Washington State, a wholesale transfer in long-term leadership. It's just due to retirement. It's the boomer generation moving on, and there's the next millennial, new blood coming in.
New blood coming in, exactly. Also, I think now it's common for new graduates or even people that graduated, say, 5-10 years ago, to think that just having education in a particular subject is sufficient. And in an emergency management, that is not true. I would be much more inclined to hire someone with real experience than someone that just had a degree.
The theory.
Exactly.
Well, again, we always hear about California. I mean, last year, big fires, of course, mudslides follow. When people nationally think about places that have earthquakes and should be worried about, they think about California. Now that you've been up here, you know, how does Washington State measure up to California from a hazards perspective?
So the hazards are very similar. The terrain is very similar. The west side of Washington and the west side of California is coastline, a line of mountains, and then you have more kind of desert area on the east side. So the hazards are very similar: wildfires, flooding, and then of course earthquakes. The difference is the frequency and impact of those. So California every year has both catastrophic wildfires and catastrophic flooding. People always think California doesn't have enough water, which is true, but they still manage to have catastrophic flooding. Yes. So Washington has flooding and wildfires, but to a much less frequent degree. So much fewer disasters, so people don't get as much response experience.
So one thing on wildfires, just to validate for people, I tell people living in Western Washington, there is a wildfire risk in Western Washington, even extending into suburbs.
Yes,
would you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, anything that makes a place pretty to live also makes it dangerous. So people having trees near their houses, it could even just be a neighborhood that's close, right? Wood shake roofs, not clearing brush around their houses. Western Washington is very dense with trees and whatnot. So absolutely, that urban wildland interface is definitely an issue.
So what have you found to be, I talked about similarities, to be the biggest difference between the two states that you've said, oh, this is different?
So the first thing I noticed was something really positive for me coming here, and that is how collaborative emergency managers, my partners regionally, were. Very welcoming. I was involved in a lot of high-level activities pretty early in the time that I'd been here. Also a lot of women in powerful positions in Western Washington, which you'd think would be the case in California, and it's not. So, and those of us in emergency management are very willing to work together. So I found that to be really refreshing.
Well, you're now the Bellevue Emergency Manager, Director, and kind of last question for this half before we break is, what's your primary duties there? And priorities.
Yeah, so I have three main areas that I focus on that are really priorities for us. So the first one being ensuring that the entire city, all city departments who have responsibilities are ready to help with their resources should there be any kind of incident, from a snowstorm to something more catastrophic like an earthquake. So I spend a lot of time doing training and exercises with city departments. That we also focus on community engagement and public education. As you may know, there are a lot of first-generation immigrants in the city of Bellevue related to the tech industry, and a lot of folks have no idea what the hazards are. And they often come with a lot of family members, many of whom English is a second language. So reaching those vulnerable populations is definitely a priority. And then lastly, working with the private sector. We have a lot of new businesses coming into the city of Bellevue. Economic development is really a priority for the city itself. So working with those private sector partners, making sure that I help them help their employees. And how do we form a true partnership so that the city can be safer, more resilient.
I've seen you doing that, actually, with one company in particular. So way to go.
Yeah, thank you.
A lot of times people just focus on the government side, but it's total.
Yeah, I think that to be really successful, we need the private sector involvement. And they're very interested in doing that. Very interested in information sharing and lending their knowledge and expertise in new ways. So that's really exciting.
All right. We're going to take a break here for you folks at home. We'll be right back, but watch this message, and then we're going to pick up again with more about Bellevue Emergency Management and around the region and the leadership roles that Curry Mayor has in emergency management. So we'll be right back.
As a mom, it's your job to prepare for this. Your children rely on you for safety and health. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and you need to be prepared.
For more information on catastrophe preparedness, go to makeitthrough.org.
The Regional Public Information Network is your one-stop resource for news about local and regional disruptions. Go to rpin.org for breaking news on everything from road closures and weather warnings to regional emergencies. RPIN brings you information from more than 60 responding agencies serving King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties. Subscribe and you'll receive news alerts wherever you are by email, text messaging, or pager. Visit us at rpin.org and download emergency contact cards for your family. Be in touch, stay in touch.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us today on Disaster Zone, we're talking with Curry Mayer, the Director of Bellevue's Office of Emergency Management. Curry, we talked quite a bit about California a little bit and Bellevue. I'd like to finish up on the Bellevue piece of, I know you just did a big earthquake exercise with Bellevue's city staff.
So yes, we did what's called a full-scale exercise at the beginning of June. And full-scale means that you actually have crews out in the field doing what they would actually do following an earthquake. Yeah. So we had utilities and transportation and fire crews all outside. And to add some realism, we had messages hidden throughout the city, some under traffic cones and whatnot, so that when folks went out, they would have additional details of their exercise scenario to add to the play.
They'd be reporting damages.
Yes, yes. So they get an initial exercise scenario that says there's been a big earthquake. They go out to do their work, and then they get additional story details when they're out in the field, which adds realism. We also had private sector involvement. Kemper Development Company was involved and played in the exercise.
And they're big in Bellevue.
They are, which was really exciting to have them play. We had about 75 city department folks that played in our Emergency Operations Center. And again, we added realism by adding to the story as we went through the exercise. So the first hour and a half of the exercise, we played as if there were no communication modes available. So no cell phone, no landline, just like there would be in a
Just radio.
real earthquake, just radio. And we have a great radio group, so that was really helpful. Why this is important is that most of the people that come to work in the Emergency Operations Center have other jobs with the city. Their main job is not emergency management. So they have to have some practice, some muscle memory, if you will. How do you use the equipment? What are the things that are most important? And each of the people that come to work in the operations center have expertise in a particular department, so fire or transportation or utilities. And people don't practice enough. As you and I were discussing earlier, the Army does a really good job of practice. And we don't do that as much as
in the civilian
civilian world. Yeah, absolutely. It's also unusual for a city to do a full-scale exercise because it's so labor-intensive to get ready for it. It takes 6 to 8 months to plan for it. You need the subject matter expertise of all those who are playing to make it real.
Right. See if you agree with my thing. When I was local emergency manager, I always would say we have to plan that probably only about 25% of the people who respond to the EOC at the time of a catastrophe may have ever been here before.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, it's because they had family issues, they're not here, they can't get there.
Absolutely.
You would agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all challenges that we talk about all the time. So we try to have 3 deep for each position, which also can be difficult. And yes, depending on the time of day, the folks that you have trained may not be able to get there. So we also spend a lot of time on what we call just-in-time training. So we have a lot of cheat sheets and checklists and guides in the EOC. So should someone come and not have been to any of the drills, then they can at least
follow it off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Can't put it in perspective. How many staff do you have in your office of emergency?
I have 6.
Okay. And then do you know the number of city employees in Bellevue?
I don't.
Okay.
Total. There are about 250 or so in the fire
but
department.
It's in the hundreds.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Probably more than that. So and 6 is actually unusual for a city in a positive way.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, especially in smaller cities, they may have 1 person.
Or a part-time.
Or a part-time person.
Or it's additional duty.
Yeah,
right?
an additional duty for public works or someone else. So the fact that I have 6 dedicated staff is really remarkable.
But
yeah.
In comparison to the full workforce, it's
it's
just
small.
a little piece of it.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. Right. And you're really probably one of the biggest challenges in emergency management is that your success really depends on your ability to get people who don't work for you and whom you have no authority over to help you.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
You're constantly being persuasive.
I do a lot of writing. I call it leading without authority.
Yes, absolutely.
So pleading without authority, maybe. I don't know. But you talked a little bit about your regional approach, working with neighboring cities and that, but you have an official role now, you just assumed, in being I think it's chair of the Emergency Management Advisory Committee.
Yes.
For King County.
Yes.
So it's a King County group officially constituted. All the memberships have to be approved by the council.
Yes.
And all that. So why don't you explain what that group is?
Okay. So EMAC, or as you mentioned, the Emergency Management Advisory Committee, is a group of people who provide recommendations to King County Council on everything having to do with emergency management. So what does that mean? What do we need to focus on as a county to make sure we can help the most people? So it's in county code. It, as you mentioned, all of the representatives have to be approved. You go before the King County Council and you have to be approved. It's also designated in the code who should be a member.
So not by name, but
not by name, by title, by organization. Fire, law, medical. So both hospitals and emergency medical are represented. Utilities, water, wastewater, and then we have a few private sector folks that are helping us as well. Okay. So we get together on a monthly basis and look at what are the projects currently underway in the county. Are there any gaps, things that we need to focus on? And then we would make recommendations based on that.
And there's some elected officials representing suburban cities.
Yes,
also.
there are. And some of the smaller cities also have elected officials who attend.
Okay, and I know Bellevue, because its city's over 100,000, which I think is Bellevue.
Yes.
And then Renton.
Yes.
Is Kent there now? I think. I know Kent.
I think so.
Is sitting
so.
there.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, and Bellevue is interesting with population of 145,000 residents, and then during the day we increase by 100,000 for how many people work there.
The commute.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that if I'm trying to go to
Yes,
Bellevue
if you're trying to go
from
anywhere.
Puyallup on 405.
Yes.
Yes. So, what are the activities of the committee? I mean, you have period, I think, bi-monthly meetings, or no, they are monthly meetings.
Yeah, we do have monthly meetings.
Yeah.
So there is a number of projects underway that grant funding from the federal government is supporting. And then, so we have a progress report on what's happening with those projects. And then we look at also what are some new projects that we should be engaged in that will help us be more resilient or help us help people.
Okay. So you're also chair of the Critical Infrastructure Committee. You were doing that before you became chair.
Yes.
So you're chair of both now.
Yes, yes.
What's the Critical Infrastructure
Yeah,
Committee?
and there are some connections between the two committees. So critical infrastructure, first of all, when you say that, sometimes people don't understand what that means. So critical infrastructure is really about what are those things that are the foundation for daily life in the United States. And the federal government has put together 16 sectors that they believe anything that disrupts those 16 sectors would have catastrophic effects on our way of life, our economy, people's ability to do business, go to school, all those things. And there are things like energy, communication, transportation, water, of course.
And the ability
utilities, yes, utilities.
Sewer, yes.
So then that committee is a working group that reports to EMAC, the Emergency Management Advisory Committee, specifically focused on critical infrastructure. What are the interdependencies in the state of Washington for critical infrastructure, and how can we strengthen those? So that is a true public-private partnership in the Critical Infrastructure Committee. So we might look at transportation, for example, and if there's a catastrophic event and a number of the transportation routes are impacted, either blocked or overpasses are broken, collapsed, what do we do? How do we get it back up and get resources to people that need them?
And I know under your leadership, been talking about it's not just King County, all these infrastructures, like the road doesn't magically end at the county boundary north and south, or the pipeline doesn't, they're bringing all our fuel from Anacortes down.
Yes.
The other people matter in this whole process.
Yes, and a good example of that was the pipeline break that was in British Columbia.
For natural gas.
Yes, that affected us here in the Puget Sound area. But absolutely, critical infrastructure really needs to be looked at across county lines. Disasters don't respect boundaries either, and to really be able to be resilient and help people, we need to look across all of those kind of jurisdictional boundaries. So we're really looking at how do we work with the neighboring counties, Pierce and Snohomish, and then also Kitsap is also interested in doing some of that critical infrastructure work.
Okay. So what's changed about emergency management over your tenure?
Yeah.
And then we'll get to some advice.
Okay. So what's changed is when I was first I've been in the field over 25 years. So it used to be that it was only emergency managers were either former firefighters, former police officers, or former military.
I resemble that.
Yes. So, but that was it. It was kind of a closed door. You couldn't really get in otherwise. I started doing training in the field, and even then, people were questioned by authority. Why are you in this kind of position?
What do you know?
Yeah, what do you know exactly? And then it was predominantly men. That's changed significantly. Also, there were no degree programs when I started, so people had a variety of other
there's probably one.
backgrounds.
North Texas had
Did they?
one. They were the only one in the nation, and then after 9/11, it just exploded.
Yeah.
Positively.
So, but even so I started in the early '90s, and
Yeah.
you know, before 9/11, and so it was really very new, and it was a lot of times other duties as assigned. So it's really blossomed into a profession that's known in a lot of areas and well respected, and really involves a lot of other disciplines.
Okay, so we've talked about this career piece. I can see somebody sitting home saying, boy, that really looks interesting. I love
Yeah.
helping people. It sounds
Yeah.
exciting. Maybe that's something I should pursue myself. So in a minute, what would you tell them?
I would tell them a couple of things. One, it's great to have a degree, but theory is not going to serve you as well as having some real experience. So how do you do that? Volunteer, work with cities or counties are always looking for people who are interested in working on projects. So real world experience is going to be much more important than just theory. The other thing that I think is important for people coming into the field to know is that you have to be okay with being uncomfortable, with being able to make decisions in a really chaotic situation.
The hot, well, I don't know, I haven't heard it lately, but ambiguity.
Yes,
Dealing with making decisions
absolutely.
with ambiguity.
With
You don't
ambiguity.
know whether the decision you're making is right or wrong, but something needs to be done.
Yes, absolutely. And not worrying about how you're going to pay for something, as long as you, life safety is really the priority. And sometimes you have to just make a decision without the authority and not knowing how you're going to pay for it.
Yes. And, you know, so what can they do to you? As a guy once told me, I was looking for a job when I got this one.
Yeah, that's funny.
But
it's also the most interesting and most fun.
Yeah.
It really is. I can't imagine doing anything else.
And we're never done.
We're never done, that's
Yes.
correct.
I'm right about work-life balance in emergency management.
Oh, there's no such thing.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. Well,
No
listen,
such thing.
it's been terrific, Curry. I think
Thank you.
people will have learned a lot about emergency management in general, certainly what is happening in Bellevue and that. And for showing up, you get this lovely disaster zone mug that you get to take.
I'm
and
so excited. Thank you.
Yes. I hope all your disasters are small ones and that you're fabulously effective and dealing with ambiguity.
Thank you.
All right. And for you folks at home, this brings us to the end of our show for today. Thanks for tuning in and learning more about what Bellevue's been doing, what Curry Mayer has done in his career, and what others can do to become better prepared for disasters. Remember, if you're going to get prepared, today is a good day to start. Have a great day and tune in again soon. Bye-bye.